It's big. It's heavy. It's loud. They're overly cinematic too. Hi! What? I'm sorry, that's the only way I could get that pun in. Hiwatt amplifiers are often associated with Marshall amps because they look somewhat similar, but they're anything but similar when it comes to sound. The old original Hiwatts, just like this one, were wired by British Navy manufacturers with extremely clean wiring spec. Here's some of the really neat point-to-point hand wiring in this amp. This resulted in Hiwatt's signature sound along with extra thick cabinets, and boy are they heavy. And in those extra thick cabinets were Fane speakers as opposed to Celestions, which Vox, Orange, Marshall were all using at the time and still continue to do. This made the Hiwatt sound really stand out, so a Hiwatt amp on its own is one thing, but combined with the Hiwatt speakers and Hiwatt cabinet, that's the sound. Which means that this massive 4x12 combo is the full package, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. So this is a roughly 1974 Hiwatt SA412, and to fully understand this we need to talk about valve amps in general, so let's start there. According to the 1974 Hiwatt catalogue, this model was made with bass players in mind, which is interesting for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because spec-wise, this amplifier is no different from the standard 50 watt Hiwatt DR503. That's a guitar amplifier. And cabinet wise, this is your standard extra thick, extra heavy Hiwatt 412 with 4 Fane made Hiwatt speakers. Now today's bass players mainly play solid state or hybrid amplifiers, small, light and loud amplifiers that can be pushed to loud volumes and stay clean. And so can this amplifier here. Not the small and light aspect of it, but it can be pushed to a very loud volume and still remain clean. Anyway, the point is that today's bass players have a plethora of options for solid state and hybrid amplifiers, whereas guitar players have the complete opposite. They have plenty of valve amps and very few solid state amplifiers. And why is that? Why do guitar players en masse gravitate towards valve amps, and if not valve amps, then amp modelers modeling valve amps? The reason? Gain. This is a modern high gain valve amp. There are two sections of a valve amp that I'd like to draw your attention to. One being the preamp, that's this bit here. These are the preamp valves and they're responsible for a lot of the overall tone shaping of the amplifier. This is where the gain is coming from. This is what the gain knob is controlling, but that's modern amplifiers. 70s amps didn't have gain controls. They still had preamps for tone shaping, but just not any gain. Like the name would suggest, the preamp is before any actual amplification. That's this bit. This is the power amp section, and this is what makes things loud. This is what the volume knob controls. But if you turn your volume knob to 10, not only does it get loud, it'll start to break up and get a bit distorted. That's power amp gain. Now most modern amps, and most modern players for that matter, get their gain from the preamp, from the gain control. It's a different sound, but you can get a lot more gain from it, and at just about any volume. Now when it comes to this amplifier, no gain. This amplifier and many from its era are clean amplifiers designed to get as loud as possible before breaking up. Any crunch that you hear from this amplifier is accessed from turning the volume to 10. And that's just way too loud. No exaggeration, way too loud. And this is a 50 watt. By the early to mid 1970s, amp manufacturers started to realize that while guitar players wanted a bit of crunch in their tone, they also wanted to keep their hearing. So the master volume was introduced. It gave players the ability to turn the amp's main volume to 10, but turn the master volume down to a much more reasonable level. It meant that you got the power amp crunch, but you didn't go deaf. And interestingly, Marshall's master volume had come out after Hiwatt had introduced it. So let's play it. The amp's volumes have been maxed out, but the master volume is keeping it a lot more reasonable. It's basically the sound of classic rock. And you may have also noticed something. I've got 2 cables running into this amplifier and there's 4 inputs. What is that about? You see it on vintage amps, but what is it? Well, just like modern amplifiers, vintage amps also have multiple channels, but instead of being foot switchable, these you just plug your cable into whichever channel you wanted. So you've got 2 on this amplifier, you've got normal volume and you've got brilliant volume. So I'm going to play both of them and they're both cranked. This is what normal volume sounds like. And this is brilliant volume. So brilliant volume is a little bit more trebly, but it's also got a little bit more breakup. But if you wanted to mix both channels and get a 3rd channel out of your amp and get the bassiness of the normal volume with the more breakup of the brilliant volume, what you would normally do is take a small patch cable and jump between both channels on the amplifier. But instead of doing that and to add a little bit more versatility, I'm using a trick I learned from Dan Hawkins from The Darkness. I saw him doing this with his Marshalls. He uses an ABY box like I've got on my pedal board, and I'm sending 2 cables, 1 into each channel. So just like with a modern amplifier, I can select the channels on this amplifier with my feet from my pedal board, and I can access both channels at the same time, and that gives me my favorite sound from this amplifier. So I'm going to play all 3 channels now and you'll hear the difference when I switch. So that's my favorite sound of the amp just as the amp, but it opens up even more if you add just a little bit of boost on the input. Now already I'm using a fairly high output pickup in this guitar, but if we boost that again with something like an overdrive, like a tube screamer for example, or in my case an emulated tube screamer, it's going to make this amp a lot more high gain. It sounds absolutely huge. Through this video, it's not doing it justice. I'm mic'd up, by the way, with a SM57 clone. On the normal volume, also, it's pretty much a clean channel, so you can have a clean amplifier just with the AB switch as well. I've also just realized, and I should probably point this out, this is dead quiet. The amplifier is on, the channel's volumes are maxed out. Now the master volume is down, but there is no hum, there is no buzz, there is no anything. I'm going to cut to the mic'd up sound close. This is what it sounds like. And I'd also like to point out that the amplifier is on during all of this, like. But if I had a tube screamer and a JFET boost from the Strymon Sunset, now granted the Sunset does have a little bit of noise reduction, but I've got it on its lowest setting and there's still nothing. Now I don't know why this is a thing, maybe it's to do with the immensely clean wiring inside the amp. Now what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to play it because it's way too loud and I don't want to go deaf, but I'm going to turn the master volume all the way up and we'll hear maxed out 50 watts what type of noise will be on the amplifier. Okay, so there is a little bit of a buzz there, but it's nothing compared to modern high gain amps on the same maxed out setting, that's for sure. to close out, I think this is a really nice sounding amp, but it's got some drawbacks too, and the drawbacks are significant enough to where I don't think you're ever going to see an amplifier like this made ever again, be it Hiwatt or any other brand for that matter. One cool thing is that it's got this polarity switch on the front of the amplifier, because this is coming from a time when, you know, it was the 70s. You'd have a wall of amplifiers. So to have a polarity switch on the actual amplifier as opposed to having to have a switcher box or an ABY box with a transformer in it to do so is actually a really cool feature. And you don't see that on modern amps because people aren't running massive rigs anymore. And while this sounds really, really, really good, it's just too damn heavy. You know, this came with the option of having casters. It didn't come standard, it didn't come stock with wheels. You had to have the option, the added extra. This is at minimum a 2-person lift, and I can't imagine what it would be like to get it up a flight of stairs, and I'm not gonna try either. Now, as this was marketed towards bass, the obvious comparison is one of those big Ampeg cabinets, but that's just a cabinet. The head comes separate. This is the whole package. Massive 70s transformers, which are not light, included in this extra thick cabinet with big massive speakers with massive magnets. The whole thing is huge, which is really cool, and it sounds great, but it's just not practical for, I don't think, anyone. Any of these that are out there, and there can't be many because Hiwatt didn't make a huge number of amplifiers in their prime. These will just be relegated to storage or studio use. Even though they were designed to be touring amplifiers, they're not going to be used like that. And that's why you're never going to see one of these again. So this is the Hiwatt SA412. Thank you for watching. Like the video, comment, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.